I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's block we call Adapting Philip K. Dick. In the last episode, we looked at 3 failed attempts to adapt the epic novel Dune. In this one, we look at several successful adaptations of another iconoclastic sci-fi author, Philip K. Dick. Philip Kindred Dick was the author of over 160 novels and short stories. His work was fascinated with several recurring themes such as alternate realities, authoritarian governments, and drug abuse, many of which we discuss in today's block. Dick passed away in 1982 at the age of 53, but his influence will live on forever. Rick Deckard is a bounty hunter working with the cops to hunt down rogue androids known as replicants. Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer will have you asking yourself, do androids dream of electric sheep? In Ridley Scott's 1982 film, Blade Runner. Douglas Quaid takes a trip down memory lane and unlocks repressed memories from his life as a secret agent. Are these real or implanted memories? Arnold Schwarzenegger stars in a quite literally eye-popping performance in Paul Verhoeven's 1990 film, Total Recall. The Washington, D.C. pre-crime unit, led by Chief John Anderton, uses the talents of 3 psychics to predict and prevent murders before they occur. But when the tables are turned, Anderton is forced to confront the very system he helped to create. Tom Cruise stars in Steven Spielberg's Minority Report from 2002. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
What if I go north? Disappear? Would you come after me? Hunt me?
No, I wouldn't. But somebody would.
You know that Voight comp test of yours? Did you ever take that test yourself?
I think I read this, but what's really interesting is that what's represented in that moment of clarity at the end of Blade Runner is that the androids are achieving their own humanity while humanity is losing its humanity.
The precogs can see a murder 4 days out. Why the late call?
And we call it a red ball. With crimes of passion, there's no premeditation, so they show up late. Most of our scrambles are flash events like this one. We rarely see anything with premeditation anymore.
People have gotten the message.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster, and with me, as always, is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
Hey, how's it going? I'm not even sure who I am anymore.
Oh, nice. Today we've got another person riding shotgun today in Jeremy's magnetic floating Lexus, Andy Buigues. How you doing, man? Welcome back.
Good. How are you guys? It's great to be back.
Fantastic. And today we have a very special show with a very special guest. Jeremy, would you mind doing the introduction?
Yeah, had a mutual buddy of ours came up with this block of some really exciting films, and it'd be great to hear a little more about it. Chris Michael.
Woo!
All right, thank you, guys. It's great to be here. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about Chris Michael too, but we'll remain an enigma.
Yo, Chris Michael, awesome guy, really funny. Haven't spoken to him in a couple years. How's it going?
It's going really well.
Yeah, no, I do want to say a couple things about Chris. It was great to have him be part of this block. He's also a big movie fan, as well as my co-pilot whenever we are playing video games. So this is a great collaboration.
Well, also, you guys did a movie together, right?
Yeah, that's right. We did a short film for a submission for a horror contest. It was for the ABCs of Death, and we had the letter M. Luckily, we already wrote a script called Centipede, so changing that to Millipede wasn't a really difficult thing to do. It was a lot of fun to work on. It was campy 80s type horror film. So, it's great to have Chris on board.
Get your ass to Mars. Get your ass to Mars. Get your ass to Mars.
So, Chris, you put together a really fun block, some movies that we had revisited. I'm sure a lot of us have seen them already, but would you mind doing the intro to the block?
Would love to. Thanks, Brian. I think nowadays, with the major release of Cyberpunk 2077 across all major gaming platforms, we're taking another look at that genre, one of the forefathers of which is Philip K. Dick. So the block that we're going to be looking at and watching and reviewing today is one that is an inspiration from Philip K. Dick's work. We have 1982's Blade Runner. We have the 1990 version of Total Recall, and we have 2002's Minority Report.
Now, you said there's another version of Total Recall. Did I miss that one, or just refuse to go see that one? Is that what happened?
Yeah, you're missing out on the gem.
I think your mind was erased of that one.
Yeah.
You must have visited Recall afterwards.
You can't recall.
Recall,
Yeah.
recall,
All right.
recall.
We did it, folks.
Yeah, Chris, this was a great shift, actually, because we were going to do a different block, but then you decided to do the cyberpunk focus, and it was good to watch these ones. And one of the movies, Minority Report, I'll say it right out, I didn't like it when it first came out, but watching it again, it's a really, really well done movie. Very like detective noirish again. We're back into like that noir vibe, and it was really fun to watch.
Wow, I kind of had the reverse. I really liked it when it came out, and now watching it,
Oh no.
not as much. I mean,
Yeah.
still enjoyable. Still had a good time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not mad about it, but it was better in 2002, I think.
So you said these were adapted then from the short stories of Philip K. Dick. I have never read any of them. Jeremy, I'm sure you've read all of them back to back 3 or 4 times each.
I have, and I actually just read them all recently. In fact, I just finished To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, the novel that became Blade Runner today. So fresh in the mind.
Right.
Nice, and it's a really weird book. I have to say, I skimmed it in preparation for this. I wouldn't say I really read it, but a few things jump out when you look at the works of Philip K. Dick. One, overwhelming misogyny. Just the man who was married 5 times. I don't think he really enjoyed or respected the female equal in this world. And one thing that jumps out to me when looking at the novel versus the book for Blade Runner is the real obsession with animals. I mean, that is something that didn't really make it into the film.
It's mentioned.
It's in the film almost as a reference, as an Easter egg.
A couple of different times, yeah.
You hear it.
When she talks about the snake and, I can't afford a real snake. You think I'll be working here?
Yeah, and the line of questioning is like, someone gives you a calfskin wallet, somebody's serving dog. And these are like the biggest morality questions that they, can come up with, and it all has to do with animals.
The reference to the tortoise, kind of a direct reference to the end of the novel.
You look down and you see a tortoise, Leon. It's crawling towards you.
Tortoise? What's that?
You know what a turtle is?
Of course.
Same thing.
But it's cool because in talking to Jeremy about the novel, I'd read it probably several years back, so it's been a while, but the tortoise is kind of a big point of the ending of the novel, and it's interesting that, it shows up as a reference in the movie only.
Well, it actually, so they open the book with a quote of a newspaper report from, the book was written in 1968. This is a contemporary news report talking about how this tortoise that was in the South Seas had just died, and that tortoise, was a pet of Captain Cook, the 18th century explorer.
Jesus.
And then in the book itself, animals are a huge deal. And in the book, unlike the movie, the Harrison Ford character Deckard is kind of a fleshed out character and has this burning desire to have an animal and be able to care for it, and like he's dying to kill all these androids to collect his bounty to be able to afford to buy an animal.
That's his motivation?
Yeah.
That's his entire reason for doing what he's doing. It's to get a real sheep. He had a real sheep.
But a real one as opposed to the synthetic version of it, right? He wants the real...
Right.
He had a real sheep. It died.
So he had one. Like he's married in the book, and his father-in-law or whatever got them a sheep as a wedding present. Yeah, the sheep died, like you're saying. Like it got tetanus and died, and then they replaced it with a lookalike robot sheep.
Right.
In this world of animals being scarce, it's sort of a sign of your place in the world if you're able to afford an animal.
Status thing.
It's a status thing, and to keep up with the Joneses and all his neighbors and everything else, everyone has their animals out there. In this like giant apartment building, there's a huge rooftop just for animals, essentially. And this thing it was a fake animal, and he was really, really wanting a real animal. And he retires a lot more androids in the book than he does in the movie, but he gets paid a ton. Eventually, ends up getting a live goat.
Sounds just like the ending of the movie.
Yeah, yeah, because
the goat sang and like tears washing away in the rain.
Rachel in the book like grabs his goat and throws it off the roof.
Yeah.
It's same thing. Sometimes, you get lines like, too bad she won't live, but then again, who does? And sometimes you get Rachel throws a goat off the roof.
Well, let's dig into the movie, shall we? And leave the pages behind.
Yeah.
Actually, here's a good question to start us off with real quick.
Yeah.
Which version of the movie did everyone watch? Because there are like 5 cuts out there.
I watched
right
the original theatrical cut with the narration.
The U.S. theatrical.
The U.S. yes. The regular version, Jared. The one that's not extra strength director's cut. I don't know. No, it was just the one that was released in U.S. theaters in 1982.
Got it. Okay.
I watched 2007's final cut.
I watched the director's cut.
Yeah, I did the same. I watched the director's cut, which is kind of a misnomer. I guess the final cut, the one that Chris watched, is the director's cut.
The director's cut isn't really the director's cut, right? Because the director's cut, it wasn't like Ridley made that cut. They took the version before the studio came in and added the narration, right? And then the 2007 one was Ridley going like, no, let me actually legitimately make this director's cut how I want to make it. Which I think is also one of the reasons why Blade Runner stands the test of time, I would say more so than the more recent films that we watched of Minority Report and Total Recall.
Mm-hmm.
It has, for me, from my viewing experience anyway, watching what was essentially a 2007 refresh of the 1982 film.
It's just, I think that's the one we watched by your house, Chris, right? When we watched that several years ago.
Yes, right before 2049 came out.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I still haven't seen 2049.
Yeah, what's funny is I guess in the draft of the script that they were gonna start shooting for Blade Runner, the thing opens with the scene that opens in 2049. Whatever reason, Hampton Fancher, who wrote both, I guess, the first several drafts of Blade Runner and some of 2049, that opening scene where it's just like the farmer of his dust farm or whatever walks into the house and gets blown away. That was apparently what they went to set with to shoot, and they had storyboards and everything for it, but didn't either get shot or make it into the movie.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but anyway, sorry, derail that. But yeah, like the cuts of this movie are kind of nuts. It actually, I feel like it is something that's interesting to talk about. It's like, yeah, the final cut, it's sort of the George Lucas revisionist cut. They had a lot of odd digital effects that do things like at one point, Deckard, grabs that guy who has the electric snake or whatever, and he's yelling at him. They got Harrison Ford's son to come in and mouth the lines that he says, because for whatever reason in that shot they didn't use the dialogue that they shot on set. They just had him loop something else in there later, and his mouth doesn't line up. But in the movie that you saw, Chris, they had his son's jaw do the mouthing of the lines. And then, when Joanna Cassidy gets assassinated and then goes through the plate glass windows, they had her come back,
Rose.
25 years later to reshoot her scene that the stunt woman did.
Well, partly because it wasn't a stunt woman, right? Didn't the stunt person for both her and Daryl Hannah's character were male stunt people? And so it was,
for Daryl Hannah, yes. For Joanna Cassidy, apparently it was a stunt woman.
Okay.
But it was that you could clearly see her face, and she was wearing this awful wig, and it's something they were kind of cringing and embarrassed about.
I used to never notice it, but now I look for it every time it happens. It's funny.
Yeah.
I would say, though, that in terms of manipulation and goofy manipulations at that, the theatrical cut might be the worst offender, because in the theatrical cut you have this hammed-in voiceover that doesn't really add anything to the story. It's just narrating to make it more obvious, and then you have this happy ending with shots pulled from The Shining,
right?
Just like the Colorado
totally
landscape.
Disjointed shots. Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense for the world, right?
All of a sudden the sun comes out. Yeah.
Where the hell are they?
We're in dystopian last survivability days of where, real animals are the greatest thing you can own, and there's off-world opportunities with dispensable labor and great living. Earth is left to ash and dust, and yet you can still take a wonderful drive down that beautiful countryside.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, she didn't expire.
Yeah.
I tried to put myself in the mindset that they were off world at that point, and we were seeing somewhere else that was nicer, or a nicer world, and we didn't see the whole travel, So I don't know.
What about the voiceover?
It sucked.
But instead of hearing Edward James Olmos say that, she won't. Too bad she won't live. But then again, who does? We instead hear the last thing that they say is like, it turns out Tyrell made her different, and luckily she'll live forever. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we were just okay with everyone else lives for 4 years. She's got a perfectly fine life, and she'll live on till the sequel 30
Clean
years
bill
later.
of health. Yeah, exactly.
Now, do you suppose when they were recording the voiceover at the end, they suspected that wasn't going to stay in the film, or no?
Well, so what's crazy about the voiceover story, and if you have the 5-disc Blu-ray, they have this on there. It's a 4-hour documentary where they talk about all this stuff, and it's really fascinating. If you're a fan of Blade Runner, you should definitely check that out. That was called Dark Days.
We'll put a link in the description below.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, but it's called Dark Days, which apparently is what the shooting draft of the script was called before Blade Runner. And in any case, the voiceover thing was weird. So they were super over budget. They had formally fired Ridley Scott. Briefly, it was he was kind of fired over the weekend, and then they brought him back to finish it, but they wanted to kind of show him that he could be fired, type of thing. So there was a lot of pressure. The first cut of the movie came in at 4.5 hours or something like that, and then it was something insane. And so as they kept paring it down, that they didn't know what the story was going to be. They were writing the thing on the day while they were shooting it. For instance, the most famous line in the movie was just something that Rutger Hauer improvised, the Tears and Rain.
Yeah.
And in fact, the written speech was just about the stars of Orion and everything like that, right? And without that line, the speech just kind of falls flat.
Yes.
And it's sort of a crazy, just sort of just happened to nail it type of thing. It was almost on accident. As they were going through these cuts of the movie, they got to a place where they did a test screening, and nothing was making sense to everybody. So the producers were getting really worried, the financiers were getting really worried. So they're like, okay, let's do some voiceover. And they had a session of voiceover with Ridley there, and they were just kind of batting ideas around. They didn't have anything written down. And this is also during a writer's strike, so it was this perfect storm thing. Later on, Ridley was gone doing something else, and they had just some other team of an engineer and a producer and someone hammering out lines on a typewriter, and they just handed him to Harrison Ford, and they're like, all right, read. And that is the voiceover in the movie that Brian watched.
It doesn't even sound like it matches that character. He sounds like he's doing a different character.
Totally. And that's what he was doing.
And he kind of talks like this. Instead of the cool Harrison Ford Deckard you kind of get this guy.
Brian must have upped him to the Blade Runner unit. That gibberish he talked was city speak, gutter talk, a mishmash of Japanese, Spanish, German, what have you.
Listen, they just needed voiceover. What do you need, a roadmap?
Yeah.
The ironic part of all that is that in tying the book in is that they were concerned that the ending wasn't upbeat enough or wasn't a happy enough ending. But I was telling Jeremy, the ending of the book is so much bleaker and more depressing The ending they finally arrived at least in the director's cut, was actually a lot more uplifting than the book itself.
Now, is the ending just the origami and then seeing the Pegasus coming through in the dream? Is that the ending you mean, or
not at all?
No, of the movie. Of the movie.
You're talking about in the movie. Yeah. In the movie. Sorry.
And that was like the final.
In the sort of director's cut and the final cut, it is.
So this is when we're confused whether or not Deckard himself is a replicant, right? Like that's where we get that because he's having that dream. Is that kind of what we get out of it?
Yeah, there's that ambiguity, and that was definitely underlined in the final cut. At some point there was the unicorn footage was added. I saw one like conspiracy theory that it was footage from Legend, but I guess that's not true. Ridley Scott's Legend with Tom Cruise.
Do we know that for sure?
Yeah, technically it did go on the bill of Blade Runner, but apparently, according to the producer who was out there shooting it with Ridley, the idea was to shoot test footage for Legend. And then it didn't make it into the theatrical cut, the international theatrical cut, or the work print. The work print was the one that, didn't have the voiceover in it. That then got screened sort of accidentally when, Warner Brothers sent the wrong print to a revival screening in 1992. They watched the movie without the voiceover, and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, this movie's a lot better without the voiceover. And then that spurred on the idea to make the director's cut, or what got called the director's cut. But Ridley apparently wasn't around. He was in the middle of Thelma and Louise or something at the time. Or maybe it was G.I. Jane, I can't remember. He was in the middle of something else. Couldn't make it to do the director's cut, and so they put it together based on the sort of notes of the work print and everything else. And that's the one that I ended up watching. And then later in 2007, like you were saying, Chris, they brought back Ridley and had a team come together and then did all these enhanced special effects and everything else. But it was very similar to the director's cut. But in any case, the director's cut and the final cut were the only two that had the unicorn in it. The theatrical, U.S. theatrical, the international theatrical, and the work print didn't have it.
Yeah, the cut I had did not have that. The only unicorn was the origami.
And Ridley is on record saying Deckard's a replicant. He's worn Harrison Ford down into saying it was, that Harrison Ford at one point was like, no, it's human. And I guess after like 2 decades of Ridley trying to correct him, Harrison Ford now just doesn't care.
That's more like it. Yeah, that's more like it.
But the interesting thing is the whole unicorn.
Which then also, does it make it work in the second movie?
Well, let's not talk about the second movie. Jeremy, I love you, but we got 4 cuts and 1 book to already talk about. Right? We don't need to bring in the extended universe canon. But I do want to talk about the unicorn, because that was like Ridley's stamp on it after the fact of like, no, see, this is a replicant. How would he know about the dreams? But I just want to say there was more origami than just the unicorn. There was also the man standing proudly with boner origami. And I think there was a goat or something, the first origami.
Horse or something.
There was a little like chicken or something that he puts on Emmett Walsh's nightstand or whatever that was in his office.
It was a crane.
Well, he did that one too. Yeah.
Here's a theory you're not going to find anywhere else. This is an exclusive to your podcast fan theory about the meaning of Blade Runner that no one else is talking about, and it's right there waiting for us. So we think that, according to Ridley Scott, the unicorn dream matched with Gaff's origami of a unicorn is proof that Gaff has seen into his dreams. They're implanted memories, therefore Deckard's a replicant. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's open to interpretation, and the sliding definition of reality is a theme throughout Philip K. Dick's work. However,
for sure,
let's keep in mind the year that Blade Runner is set, not the year it was made, but the year it's set, 2019. Mm-hmm. And while it's not the same universe as the one that we currently live in, there are a lot of similarities. A lot of the same brands that we know and love are still around in both universes. Well, an interesting thing happened in the mid-aughts and became more mainstream around 2017. And that's the term of unicorn, meaning a bisexual partner for an otherwise heterosexual couple. And if you look at it, and that combined with the man standing proudly with his penis for no reason, that Gaff made for him earlier, and just how flirtatious Gaff is throughout the film. It's clear to me now that because this was set in the future, that Deckard is not a replicant. However, Gaff wants to get involved on a sexual level with the relationship that he has seen between Deckard and Rachel. Mm-hmm. And that this is his way of trying to enter the couple to make it a throuple. And that is the true meaning of Blade Runner.
And because he can't speak English, he has to speak in origami.
Or that's his love language, Jeremy.
Those are gifts. Those are poems. Those are... Yeah, that's from the heart.
Although he does speak in English, right?
He does at the end. Yeah. He slowly comes to English by the end.
He's also not the only character to suddenly go from no English to English. The noodle slinger in the beginning can't understand Deckard's order, and then when the cops show up, he's like, "Hey, Deckard, they're looking for you."
Yeah, that's true. It's called convenience, language of
convenience. Right.
Lopan starts speaking English once Rutger Hauer starts talking shit.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, he's speaking like Cantonese or something, and then all of a sudden he speaks perfect English. I make your eyes.
You Nexus, huh? I design your eyes.
If only you could see what I've seen with your eyes.
Those two scenes really, I mean, obviously with the eyes and everything, really caught my attention when it comes to Minority Report and Blade Runner. Those were two very similar situations with those those like underground doctors, cybernetic doctors that you find in some shitty apartment building that have all this fucking gear all over that'll just rip your face apart and give you cybernetic implants.
And yet for some reason never clean out the refrigerators.
Yeah, the refrigerators are always disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just gonna leave a bad sandwich right above the good sandwich? It's like, come on.
For blind people?
I'm blind here.
Well, Minority Report and Total Recall definitely have a sense of humor that Blade Runner doesn't.
I agree.
I will say another thing that they all share.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go off on another little tangent here. Horrible cops. And while I think that has a deeper meaning in Minority and Total Recall, let's talk about what a horrible cop Deckard is and what he actually accomplishes. He, right off the bat, he gets the assignment. It's not his idea to go to the Foundation and do the test. He gets told, like, hey, they have a Nexus 6, go test to the Nexus 6. So he's just completely acting on orders. He does the test. He gets surprised when Rachel follows him. He gets surprised in the elevator. That's a news to him. The only real piece of police work that he does is the photo enhance scene which is very long. It's a very long scene.
He does
of him essentially zooming in on a photo.
The CSI Miami
and then he goes through the Animal Bazaar where he interrogates his way to finding a bar where he gets drunk on the job. Then he does this cool improv moment where he convinces the replicant that, not even convinces her though. She's not buying it at all. And she thinks he's a creepball.
Right.
She gets the better of him. She's strangling him. He's done for, but for the appearance of another thespian into the dressing room, which causes her to figure, I'm just going to make a run for it in my clear raincoat. The clear raincoat, by the way, was done as a production safety measure because she was going to be running through glass later on. He then fires through the crowd and shoots this replicant.
Yeah.
So but he finally now has
tons of people.
By the way, his body count will only involve women. The entire time, they will involve women. He kills 2 women, replicants, if you want to call them women or machines, whatever you want to call them, but they are of the female gender. The only 2
he doesn't kill Rutger Hauer.
Or Leon.
No, then Leon comes shortly thereafter, and Rachel saves his ass. And Rachel's the one who takes out Leon. Then, after he completely biffs it, and the main dude that he's supposed to protect gets murdered, the cops are like, hey, this Sebastian guy died too. You want to check his house out? It's not detective work that brings him there. It's another assignment.
Right.
This guy sucks at his job. He's only
funny. Now, he didn't kill Rachel. He was ordered to, but he didn't do it. So does that help
but to be fair,
balance the scales a little more?
He's a Blade Runner.
He's a Blade Runner. Yes.
He's there as a enforcement tool, not as a.
So are they more like mercenaries?
They're specialists.
He's an assassin essentially.
Contract killer.
It's not really in the movie. They kind of hint at it a little bit, but like in the book at least, they're kind of like they're getting on cop salaries or whatever, but they are all like freelance apparently.
Bounty hunters, right?
Yeah, bounty hunters. So anyway,
yeah.
Chris, you just made the best argument why Deckard's probably not a replicant.
Agreed, and I'm not even done. So then he gets into the place.
Dude, yeah.
Because if he was a replicant, he'd be a lot more effective at what he does.
Totally. He shoots Flippy Daryl Hannah, which is basically like an accident, right?
Right.
And then when he actually fights Roy, he gets his ass kicked and gets saved by Roy. And then Roy just decides, like, you know what, I'm just going to put myself into sleep mode right now because I just said something cool and I feel like I'm not going to top that. So I'm going to power down right now. And Deckard has accomplished so little and done it so poorly other than just the photo enhance thing is really his only accomplishment of the entire thing, which Andy,
and his photo enhance, he was able to enhance a photo around the corner somehow.
Yeah.
That's how enhanced those photos could get.
That feature in Photoshop hasn't been created yet, Jeremy.
What, seeing around corners?
Okay.
Yep.
We have to wait till 2019 for that to be created.
Enhanced 224 to 176.
Just another, I mean, like, this is something that'll maybe tie into some of the rest of the movies as well, but, like, the idea that Deckard is not only bad at his job in the movie, but he's also kind of just a really thin character. There's not much to him. Whereas in the book, you know, he's had all these motivations, he had all these desires, and he got really depressed, and he was like, had conflict about having to kill the replicants and everything else. And it's funny because, like, in the next two movies, the characters as written were super, super thin, and there's just like nothing to them, and they all had to be sort of invented for the screen. More so in Minority Report. I mean, Total Recall, I mean, there's not a whole lot to his character there, I guess, that we understand anyway.
Yeah.
You know, the Deckard character doesn't have a whole lot to do in the movie. As a character, there's no arc. There's nothing happens. We don't understand much about him or what he wants or what he's doing, how he feels about certain things. You know, like, we do see him kind of like feel bad that he yelled at Rachel at one point, and then and we see him react to certain things, but we don't understand him very much. But the person we end up understanding the most, I think, is Roy Batty.
He's the best character in that movie. He's the most fleshed out character by far.
And it's funny because you're following Deckard for the first hour, and
Roy Batty's probably in it for 10 minutes.
Yeah, hour 10, and then the last like maybe 20 minutes, it's all Roy Batty,
and he takes over.
And without him, I don't know. Like, the movie would just be kind of a beautiful nothing burger. You know what I mean? It's like beautiful, atmospheric, and nothing to it.
I do think that he made the movie for me. Any scene that he's in are my favorite scenes of that movie. Like when he goes to see the eye surgeon, his final scene, him holding the birds and all that. Like, it's just so iconic. And like when I think of Blade Runner, I always think of him just sitting in that blue harsh light, and it's just like that's what Blade Runner is, and he just nailed it.
And that Tears in the Rain scene is so great. To me, it makes the movie because it encapsulates like the whole kind of theme of the movie, in which you have humanity and mankind that is kind of slowly disintegrating into darkness, and then in his interaction, Deckard has this moment of epiphany with Roy Batty as the android or replicant becomes more human than the humans that are chasing him.
More human than human.
Right. And that moment of clarity represented by the dove flying away in the daylight, which is the only daylight in the director's cut, not so much in the theatrical.
Right. And the theatrical, I guess, but yeah. No, not so much in the final cut. Yeah,
it's just this great kind of visual metaphor for kind of Deckard's arc, where he recognizes that and is now ready to kind of make the leap into a relationship with Rachel. I agree with you guys. Like, Rutger Hauer really kind of makes the movie and goes to the fact that, Deckard isn't as fleshed out as he is in the novel, for example.
It made me want to put some more Rutger Hauer movies on our list for blocks, man, because I miss him.
I don't know if he's going to be able to top this one, but yeah, let's do it.
I don't know. Blind Fury, he's pretty awesome in.
Before we move on, I have to agree with you guys. Rutger Hauer is a force of nature in this movie, and I think he, combined with the music, Vangelis, The cinematography, which I guess was partly the framing, the tight framing, and the depth that they would get from the different lighting effects was partly to counter how little budget they had. So they were using those really to kind of give you a trapped feeling. So thereby you get a sense of scale without actually having to show it. And the scale within it through, the steam of the noodles and the light coming by and the rain, so much moisture and rain coming in and catching the light really makes you feel in every single one of those frames. And I think the reason Blade Runner is the most successful of those three from just a quality standpoint is the feeling that it feels real, where Total Recall and Minority Report are outlandish, fetishizations of male wish fulfillment.
Yeah, although I will make this point, which I think if we're talking about cyberpunk and dystopian futures, what is interesting is that in a way, Total Recall and Minority Report represent more of our dystopian reality, in the sense that not everyone's existence in those movies is bleak. There's a section of society that are kind of living well or doing well in this society and benefiting from luxuries at the cost of other people that are forgotten. And you see that in Minority Report. I mean, I think Minority Report probably represents that aspect of our, kind of current reality more accurately. And even in Total Recall, there's scenes of people even on Mars kind of enjoying dinner and in the airport and things like that. Obviously, they're the mutants that are being exploited and oppressed. Whereas I think that what is really interesting about Blade Runner is that it represents the kind of ultimate portrayal of this kind of dystopian cyberpunk future, because it's kind of bleak in its entirety. I mean, it takes place on Earth, an Earth that is kind of forgotten, abandoned, and slowly extinguishing.
Yeah, eroding. Yeah.
Yeah, and really, there is no escape. And I would say that the only kind of positive gleam of hope in the movie is that in finding some sort of relationship with Rachel, Deckard has reclaimed some of his humanity, right? And that's really the only thing to cling on to that. So
that's true.
It is interesting because although I agree, like in watching watching Blade Runner, I felt like, man, the cinematography is just beautiful. All the aspects of visual storytelling and filmmaking that go into it add this quality that creates this beautiful like tone piece. And there's kind of a level of complexity and that gets better with age. Like I do like kind of the social commentary of the other two in their kind of portrayal of the world as well.
Well, Paul Verhoeven is a genius of the social commentary, I'd say.
Oh, yeah.
The social satire.
I think Blade Runner has some of that. It's just not quite as it's not as central and it's not as present in the film. But if you look at some of the subtleties, like to kill a replicant is called retiring them, right? So it is the whole kind of existence is somewhat a metaphor for capitalism and your participation in capitalism, and to stop participating in that, to retire from that, is akin to death.
Is to die.
And even when Deckard refuses the job at first, what gets him in is like, if you're not police, you're nobody, or some line of like that. Where if you're not participating in the system, then your existence is unnecessary.
In the sort of like a police state. Yeah, exactly. And then also, I guess, just to slightly push back on that, I mean, like, yeah, most people we see are sort of living in, misery in this crumbling world. I guess the only exception to that would be Tyrell in his sort of luxurious sky palace in the middle of hell.
Yeah.
Well, and Sebastian, he's got that whole big place and all those toys.
Yeah, but even that castle itself seems really bleak. I mean, it's just shot. It's shot the mise-en-scene of that whole sequence. Like, I mean, in a future so dominated by technology, he's living by candlelight, and it's like there is this idea of regression even in his immense fortune and power and control.
Well, and even though you don't see it, the way that we're being presented with the off-world colonies, it just rings so false. It's like that like that this world that we're living in is hell, but like also the advertisement of like go live off in the colonies. It's like it's a little too cheerful and a little too. We're working too hard to sell it to you. You know what I mean? It's like
you mean it's just as bad there.
If it was that much better, they wouldn't need to sell it so hard.
Right, I get it, yeah.
Well, and also these replicants, right? The major problem is that they come back to Earth and they have to be hunted down. Why are they coming back from Earth if the off-world colonies are so great?
Right, exactly. Well, because they're slaves there, I guess.
You know, it's interesting, though, going back to the idea of like watching Blade Runner and kind of the visual storytelling. One of the things that is amazing is just how beautiful the film is, even in its bleakness. And I think, Chris, you were talking about this, like, in watching it again on the Blu-ray, it just felt like, wow, it's just an incredibly beautiful movie shot with such great attention. The production design is something that you get lost in. What's that?
The miniatures still
totally,
sell to me. Those big wide shots of the city.
Well, some of those miniatures were borrowed, right? The police headquarters is reused Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Really?
Yeah, and a piece of the Millennium Falcon's out there too. Yeah, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and it's done so sparingly though, and I think that's what works so well is that if you just do just enough to sell and create this world and create the right tone and atmosphere around it, it goes a long way, right? It makes it seem, like you said, Chris, bigger than it actually is or what they actually shot. And that is something that is amazing that holds up to this day.
For sure.
And it really does. I think of these three films visually, that one stuns me the most. I actually did not care for what Minority Report looked like. I thought it was really distracting, the amount of like lens flares and blurs and like these really dusty camera tricks. You know, it was very in post, a lot of just dust.
Well, they did a bleach bypass to make it dirty, according to Spielberg. Rather than just shoot it practically dirty, they did a filter effect pre-Instagram. The whole thing's filtered.
Well, it's a chemical thing, but yeah, exactly.
Lori,
Doug,
let's do it.
do what?
Move to Mars.
Let's go into the delicious Rob Bottin effects of Total Recall real quick. I just want to get right into some of that. I love how this movie opens up with, we're going to throw you out into the middle of Mars and see what happens to a person. Yeah. And then it obviously comes back later on. I really love this film, and I know we're going back to what we just said about Paul Verhoeven, but that guy can really nail the satire with like news reports and like all the, you said, the mise en scène, right? Like everything that's happening to these characters in the frame, it all has a part of that story. And he hits every note of that every time. And this was really exciting watching this one again. I think this one holds up.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the only one who doesn't think that it does.
We're all entitled to opinions.
No, you are not entitled to that opinion. Sorry, but no.
No, why, Chris? I'd love to hear what you have.
Yeah, go for it.
I think it holds up through an interpretation of the entire thing is a dream. The parts where it doesn't hold up, I think, are areas where our culture has shifted more so than necessarily a technology or filmmaking change. But there's very blatant misogyny, the way that he offs his wife, and then there's a line of like, consider that a divorce. It
wasn't actually his wife, but I mean, I know what you're saying.
I mean, was it not? Depending on what your interpretation of reality is, which is very open to interpretation.
Well, I guess. But does the movie allow that at the end?
Well, even if we take it at face value of that he really is a secret agent, I think you could still make the argument that the marriage license was official for his cover. But I don't think this is the key point to be debating.
Yeah, but he wasn't present for that, so I don't know. Did he consent to that marriage? I don't know.
So I think, look, if the whole thing is a projection of an ignorant asshole, if we accept the character as an ignorant asshole, and most of the movie is a projection of his fantasy, then it holds up. But if I'd say the elements of exoticism of different races, when he's doing the select your love interest screen.
How do you like your women? Demure, aggressive, sleazy. Be honest.
Sleazy.
His relationship with his wife, and look, to your point, Brian, it's satirical, right? And it's an extension of some of the ills of our society. And so
just magnified.
Yeah, for as ambitious of a film as it is, for as many effect shots as there are, it does hold up remarkably well. I mean, even the woman's skin suit that he has, the 2 weeks moment when he's trying to go through security.
Right.
Like, that looks really cheesy, but it's cheesy in such a way where it's fun rather than distracting.
Exactly, yeah.
Have you brought any fruits or vegetables onto the planet?
2 weeks.
Excuse me?
It depends how much you're willing to embrace the satire and kind of self-awareness or camp that you get with a Paul Verhoeven movie, right? I mean, there is definitely a luxuriating in violence and sexual innuendo and comedy and things like that. And so you have to embrace it. I think, to me, what holds up is like you take this dystopian future to present a pretty kind of biting satire on, on our kind of social situation, right? And this idea of kind of corporate fascism sent to, cranked up to the nth degree. And you set that within the setting of this spy action movie, right? I mean, you kind of have to embrace it for what that is. I feel like in the short story, there was more of the emphasis on the memory and the perception of reality. That is there, but it kind of gets lost. And it kind of, to me, it marks one of the differences between, if we look at Total Recall, Minority Report, and Blade Runner, is that in the movies, in Minority Report and Blade Runner, technology is used as a kind of philosophical exploration of the human condition and morality, whereas I feel like in the Total Recall movie, the technology is there serving as part of the commentary, of a social commentary on, corporate fascism, and it becomes a tool of that. And so it's a little bit of a kind of change in focus, and I think you can embrace the action movie to convey that, but it kind of depends how much you're willing to embrace that, really. There's there is kind of a level of fun that goes with this adventure that maybe the other movies don't have as much. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to how much leniency do we want to give it in terms of whether it's self-aware or not, whether the things that it's doing are a satire or whether they are, of the times of, when was the movie made? 1990?
Well, I'll give you one example. Quaid is supposed to be this kind of average Joe, regular guy.
He looks like we all look.
Right.
Yeah,
I can relate.
And instead they went with Arnold, who obviously is not an average guy, and he's sitting there using a jackhammer like 8 hours a day, And
yeah, but so is the full-size candy bar version of Danny DeVito. I mean, that guy,
recall.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably more like what the average man Quaid would look like.
Even in the visually and the production design, although they went through a lot of work to create this world that's very detailed, there is still a level of not quite reality there, right? Like some of the stuff looks like a set, and that it could be kind of part of his like imagination or dream, but it's like really high gloss. Like the lighting is.
Especially on Mars.
A lot of key lighting. It's not as stark or noir in its visual presentation, and all that to me kind of makes it so you are a little bit of self-aware of like this adventure that you're getting into, and then you can kind of see you get thrown along for this ride, and then at the end it's nice that this plot offers kind of like this pretty great social commentary on the exploitation of new territories and of people, and the environment for profit, right?
I have to hand it to you. It's the best mindfuck yet.
Wait, how does it work if the whole thing's a dream or a fantasy of Quaid in the end there?
He's still in the chair.
Yeah, at the end, the sky goes blue, which was foreshadowed by one of the texts saying, "Blue sky on Mars, never seen that before," as he plugs in the chip into the console.
Okay.
And there's a line that Arnold says towards the end of like,
I just had a terrible thought. What if this is a dream?
Well, then kiss me quick before you wake up.
Right.
So the thought is as we, kind of fade to white or whatever at the end, that is the culmination of his dream.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
And, everything that takes place in his adventure is said beforehand, in his conversations with either the techs or with the salesperson. Even there's going to be a two-headed dragon, which manifests through Quato.
Oh, okay. That was interesting.
They obviously go into great detail about the woman and her, all of her aspects. They talk about being a spy. They talk about just every single element of what happens later is foretold in the sales pitch or the explanation of the technology.
That's a good reading. I hadn't thought about that before. I mean, what I'd say about the him selecting the woman there, on the screen, it's like, oh, be honest, whatever, and it's like he is sort of describing the woman he sees in his dreams, and if it's for his own fantasy.
Yes and no. It's also somewhat just like the opposite of his wife from a physical standpoint.
Blondes.
His wife is white, blue-eyed, blonde girl, and he goes for the brown, racially ambiguous girl who is more adventurous and not the I'm only going on vacation to a glamour spot. So in some ways, it's just like he picks a type based on who he wants to cheat on his wife with. Yeah, you could interpret it that way.
Sure.
Your interpretation is interesting because in the short story, there's a lot of this focus on the fantasy or the dream becoming the reality. And in fact, at the end, he kind of gets thrown back. He kind of insists, the main character insists on implanting a memory of his choice. It's supposed to be a fantasy and turns out to be real. So it's interesting that you read there where the reality here ends up being an even kind of larger fantasy, presumably implanted in Arnold, or who knows, maybe it's not Arnold at all, right?
Hauser.
Yeah, I mean, if you expand it further, I mean, exactly.
Right.
If you're projecting your fantasy, would you not also project yourself to have a body like Arnold?
Maybe he's the big Danny DeVito guy the whole time, and maybe he's looking at Arnold in that situation, and that's his dream.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, to tie it to my point about Blade Runner, and I'm going to bring this up again when we get to Minority Report, horrible cops. The way that the cops behave in Total Recall is in line with someone who's not a cop projecting their fantasy about how, and I would destroy them all. They would all miss me, and they'd be shooting, and people would be dying, but they would just keep running. Like, I don't, yes, satire, yes, future rules, but at the same time, if you're a immature brain projecting yourself into being an action hero, they would behave in that way as well.
Interesting.
Although I guess you can make that argument about a lot of action movies of the 80s, right? Where people weren't exactly hitting their marks.
Yeah. Totally.
No, but it is funny to compare this a little bit to the remake and how the idea of the, like, they wanted to get rid of the sort of glossy look of it. They wanted to get rid of sort of the fun aspects and the sort of campy aspects of this movie, and try to do the same story, but by making it really severe and having the sort of tone of and maybe even dark look of Blade Runner, it all of a sudden because the story wasn't about Roy Batty accepting his mortality or whatever, the story kind of falls flat, and if it's just the same spy adventure story but without the camp, and it's no fun, why are you watching it?
Yeah.
You kind of need the fun is what I'm trying to get at.
Right, because the technology is not at the center of the philosophical exploration. I mean, no one in the 1990 Total Recall is sitting there, should we undo the Recall Corporation, right? No, it's essentially the Mars inhabitants fighting for their freedom and their freedom to breathe air, and not be subjected to the corporation there. Not sure about the new Total Recall, but again, it's very plot heavy, and as far as I can remember, it's also not so much about this idea of what if your fantasy became a reality and got implanted so deep that you had no way of coming out of it because you were always going to be driven by the impulses for the fantasy, right?
It's like the Inception thing of like...
Well, we kind of have that with Inception. Yeah, totally. Inception is Total Recall, but making the vehicle the story.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like, a little bit, talking about a little bit about the way that they treat sort of race in this movie. Like it was sort of even more explicit in the original screenplay.
Did it still have that notion of people mutating over time, and was that part of it as well, or was that all changed just due?
Mutants were in it, but Quato wasn't a mutant. He was just a fat guy.
Oh, that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
I think Quato was a mutant though. Didn't he have another head?
What was that revealed in
the screenplay? I think he had another head. The thing is that the big difference that, because I also read that original screenplay, like it's interesting that the ultimate conspiracy was not to kind of terraform Mars, but was a alien technology meant to mind control the population of Mars. I thought that was pretty interesting there.
Very different.
Yeah.
Will it save the population, or will it lead to total mind control? That's a story that's very analogous to 2020.
Yeah, it's less about corporate fascism and more about the, kind of Earth, the government of Earth, making sure they can control Mars and its inhabitants, presumably, to exploit it for its, mineral resources.
I feel like that's a simpler plot, really, because in this one, they're trying to stop people from finding out what this technology does because they know that it's going to give life to the planet when they're the ones controlling the air and they're the ones...
It'll terraform it and then allow them to not be able to profit off the air. Yeah, exactly. It's the Spaceballs,
Yeah, Perrier, exactly.
But the technology, the Martian technology, basically burns a mineral deposit to terraform the planet. But the mining that they're doing there is to bring that resource back to Earth to exploit it. So if they allow it, basically the terraforming to occur, they lose the unobtainium that they're there for in the first place.
Right. It'd be if drilling for oil would also save the Earth from greenhouse effects. So right. we can't use up all the oil because otherwise we can't protect the Earth. Yeah, I actually think the terraforming is really kind of a much more kind of biting criticism, because I think there you're getting at the heart of those in control with those resources, like we treat any natural resource that we need to live or survive, or
bottled
and
water,
then being able to and being able to control that and engage and manipulate that for profit. I think essentially you needed some sort of major conspiracy that this spy was in there to stop the advancement of, and I thought it was, that's one of the great things that does hold up about the movie, right? Where, like you said, even going back to Paul Verhoeven's other films, like what he does get right is that kind of satire, that satire that is just on the borderline of being self-aware and campy, but just enough there to, give you a little bit of a reflection.
I have to point out one moment when he's talking to he's getting the sales pitch. He shows up to Recall. He's getting the sales pitch, and he brings up, what about the guy you lobotomized? And the sales guy goes, "That's ancient history. This is safer than taking a shuttle. Just look at those stats." And he doesn't even go to show the stats. Like, it just has the monitor behind him that for a second flashes this graph.
That actor is great.
And the graph is a hockey stick growth of shuttle deaths. The two axes are death and time, but we don't see the numbers behind any. We don't know if it's
exactly. There's no specifics.
Shouldn't it be going down? That would be awesome if he said that. Right after that, he's like, "Okay, let's do it."
Yeah. The shuttle is like every day we're getting just exponentially more people dying from the shuttles. But Recall isn't good. Recall's a flat line. Recall's a flat line of fatalities. Yeah. So if they at one point did kill somebody, it's not zero.
No, they just regularly kill someone.
They are just like consistently, and given how desperate he is for customers,
it wasn't just a blip.
Yeah, seems like maybe they kill everybody. They get like one customer a day, they kill them, and their stats remain the same. They're not going up in fatalities.
Right. So this is the final synapses firing of Quaid being murdered by Recall. Is the whole movie.
Get ready for a surprise!
Yeah, didn't have that reading. And you're 2 for 2 for exciting new reads.
I'm about
Chris.
to be 3 for 3. Shall we jump into 2002's Minority Report?
Please do.
Are you talking about the movie that was pitched as the sequel to Total Recall?
Yes, and interesting that you would say that because Minority Report has very similar themes. And there is evidence to suggest that this too is the entire film is a projection of the male ego. But we can get into that later. Let's just dig into some of the more building blocks of the plot, though. Before I feel like I don't want to hog the mic. So, but I do have a similarly grounded and bad cops take on this one.
John, don't run.
You don't have to chase me.
You don't have to run.
No, that's exciting. Yeah, interestingly enough, I guess this short story was also optioned by Ronald Shusett, who was, for a long time sort of Dan O'Bannon's writing partner. Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, and was doing so while sleeping on Ronnie's couch. And then Total Recall, and then they sort of developed that together. And then it kind of maybe the first 2/3 of Total Recall was Dan O'Bannon, and the last third was John Poville, and that's a lot of the Mars stuff, or at least what ended up in the movie, the Mars stuff. Ronnie, who brought on sort of Total Recall, also optioned Minority Report. They started doing Minority Report, and the original development was for Jan de Bont, the director of Speed, Twister, and cinematographer of Die Hard, and a couple other Paul Verhoeven movies. And originally this was going to be I think a vehicle for Schwarzenegger. It would be a direct sequel to Total Recall somehow. But it changed and changed and changed. Eventually, Jan de Bont, moved on, and they brought on Spielberg, got sort of attached to it. And then Spielberg, fired the writer that was working with Jan de Bont, and then brought on Scott Frank, who ended up turning the whole thing into more of a film noir, which is how we got to sort of the movie that we ended up watching.
That's awesome. I didn't know any of that. That's very cool.
Fun stuff. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that was in the movie that came out of the story was like, the John Anderton and Whitwer sort of like, seeing the ropes on what this pre-crime thing is, and there are these horribly mutated and deformed and mentally slow
the
precogs that are hooked up to these computers and being exploited to make this pre-crime thing. And in the book anyway, it's like they instead of being collared and put into cold storage, you're thrown into a concentration camp for the crime of not committing murder. Interestingly enough, the book's plot kind of goes somewhere else, and the whole idea is to try and save the pre-crime system.
Which does come into effect in the film, but not nearly as much.
Mm-hmm.
But it is shut down, right? I mean, it's shut down by the end.
Well, it is sort of the initial goal, and then they want to tear it down by the end, yeah. And then they end up doing just that, exactly. Through this experience, John Anderton gets disillusioned and doesn't want to be a part of the system anymore, and wants to get rid of the system, versus in the book where he wanted to save it at all costs type of thing.
So nothing about the his boy being taken from him or anything like that in the book. That was all added.
Yeah, exactly. So the first writer brought Samantha Morton, the Agatha character, as a character, and kind of helped that come along. Invented the eye scanning thing and all that stuff. And then Scott Frank came in and turned it into a story with the Tom Cruise character, John Anderton, being more fleshed out with losing his son, being driven by that, ruining his marriage, and sort of, getting looped into this thing, having the mentor of the Max von Sydow character. And then, just kind of, morphing it more into film noir, which, Scott Frank was sort of a part of, reviving film noir for a while there, with Malice, Heaven's Prisoners. He also did the screenplay adaptations for Get Shorty and Out of Sight before this. So the Elmore Leonard stuff, kind of, film noir adjacent, I guess,
sure.
But, with more humor. To me, kind of ends up making the movie, having those film noir elements make the movie worth watching, aside from sort of the gimmicks of the future technology and everything else, that, unfortunately now is just our reality, whereas maybe in 2002, it wasn't the same thing. It's our reality minus cell phones, I guess, but...
It got really close. The only difference is instead of something beaming into your eye, it's just checking out your search engine and, seeing what your search results are or search history.
Yeah.
But the same exact concept, right? Like you walk in, oh, you bought these jeans.
Targeted marketing. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like these jeans now? Oh, this shirt would go well with what you bought last week. And
right.
I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
It's
definitely our dystopian present, and then also kind of predicting the pre-crime of the way that we treat people who don't commit terrorism in America.
Well, this is the first film of the three where Spielberg had a brain trust of people who worked with DARPA or one of the editors of Wired magazine to try to be somewhat accurate, though still cinematic, in the depiction of the future and where technology could be.
Futurism,
at the point.
A futurism brain tank.
Yeah.
Our USBs got smaller though.
That's true.
Yeah.
They had some pretty big tablet-sized USBs in that movie.
Yeah, but they could just project a memory, so I guess we'll give it a pass.
They definitely have the traffic problem figured out pretty well, wouldn't you say?
Vertical highways, literally highways. I thought that was a pretty neat scene. But that was definitely when it got more into the Spielberg action-y moment of this noir film, was those moments of chases on top of, what I would want to see in a video game. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I think it's impossible not to see kind of Spielberg's style and his sentimentality in the movie. But I kind of think that's what elevates the story. I mean, if you read the short story, it's got some of the same philosophical questions about free will and our approach to, in the social commentary of our approach to addressing crime. But, what's really great about this film is that it's got the emotional core with the backstory of his son, which gives the movie a really great narrative drive. I mean, to me, the scene that makes it of the whole movie is the scene where the Samantha Morton character is kind of walking them through what the future would have held for their son, and they're kind of breaking down. And it's that is the least noirish element or, cyberpunk or futuristic element of the movie. But that emotional core is there. You obviously have the thriller aspect of it that Spielberg does so well. And then you still have those ideas presented about the technology, about how do we use technology and surveillance to stop crime, how that can fall into the wrong hands, and how even the most well-intentioned things that we do to prevent crime often goes ahead and promotes it or creates potential abuse. So,
and how far do you go in order to have that system? And of course, I'd say the main theme is you can choose, right? That's also, I think, the most repeated line of that free will does exist despite the ability to predict. And the prediction is fallible, but also, the conditions that the precogs are kept in are almost exactly the same conditions, or worse conditions than what the criminals are kept in, with the Halo virtual reality prison.
Right. I mean, there are two sort of sides of, this being a horrible system, which is, the precogs, and you can't get around that. And then B, it's not that they're trying to prevent the murder, remove the person from that situation where they're going to commit a murder for, 24 hours or whatever, and then put them back. It's, erase their possibility of a future forever, essentially murdering the murderers or the future murderers.
That's the commentary. I mean, it's a stark criticism against rehabilitation and kind of using force to solve a problem, right?
Yeah.
That adds a whole level of commentary to the movie that could have just been viewed as a thriller or an action movie,
popcorn movie. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the cops are almost exact duplications of the shock troops that are in Brazil, like the movie The Brazil, like where they rappel through and like break through that skylight and whatever in the very beginning.
All collateral damage, just blowing holes in walls. Yeah.
Looking for Tuttle and Buttle.
Yeah, oh, no. Is it Tuttle or Buttle? Yeah, exactly.
I also love how our technology is to the point where we can take what somebody sees and project it with holograms for people to look at. We're at technology is at a point where faces and eyes can be scanned for informed purchasing decisions and targeted ads. But we can't scan the images to give us location information. We still have to do the gritty police work on that one.
Once the flash drives get smaller, the GPS will fit in the camera, and so
You also couldn't delineate who a person was versus a billboard outside of a window. Right. Like there were moments.
It looked like Cyclops from X-Men out there wearing his glasses. I'm like, wait, this guy's flying
James Marsden.
Yeah, it looked like he was flying outside the window.
So we've got a third party wearing sunglasses just out the window.
So there is a fan theory that does exist before this podcast that everything after Anderton is haloed in the cabin is VR projection in his prison. But I would take that further, and you're getting a fan theory here that I haven't seen anywhere else, exclusive to your podcast again.
Thank you.
That the entire thing, once again, is a projection stemming from the VR Halo prison. And not only that, Andy, but I'm going to give you that interpretation gives rehabilitation a chance. That his entire journey through his VR prison that we see in the form of this version of reality where it's all real to him is his hunt for rehabilitation and his ability to not commit the crime that got him there in the first place, which is the murder of Leo Crow. And let me just give you some supporting evidence. First of all, we know this is a technology that has been identified in the film, that there's a halo device that goes on criminals and it provides them with another reality.
Look at them. Look at how peaceful they all seem. But on the inside, busy, busy, busy. Okey pokey.
Well, so first of all, there's a couple of inconsistencies that don't work, right? The eyeball that he used, first of all, he switches out his eyeballs. Then he uses his old eyeballs for access anyway. Then he loses them, but then his wife has them later and uses them for access again.
Yeah, the IT department there forgot to disable it.
Yeah. Or put any type of flag on it. Yeah, he's not on a list.
HR immediately gets rid of your email and your iPrint. I know this.
Yeah,
they were on vacation that week, or maybe they were collared. Who knows?
Why didn't the precog see that his wife was approaching Tim Blake Nelson with a gun?
They weren't available then.
Because she wasn't going to pull the trigger. That's why.
No, they were already back. Because he was already arrested.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Well, there's also discrepancies where murder is the only thing that can be predicted, but also the placement of balloons hiding you from sight can be predicted. As she's going through the wall, suddenly lunch orders can be predicted.
Cool scene, though. Very cool scene.
And John Anderson's son who didn't live can also be predicted.
Yeah, his parallel life, which is, beautifully told like a Taylor Swift lyric. But once again, we have cops that don't exist in any reality. They just don't. Like when they're trying to chase him down in the mall, they all run together and look from the balcony from the same vantage point. They don't try to close off exits, triangulate, locate. There's no tactics at all.
Listen, they've never had to do that. They only had to scan through images. They don't even know how to.
It's like the Demolition Man cops.
For murder, what about the other crimes?
Yeah, they don't do that, apparently.
But listen, since murder has been eliminated for the last 5 years, they don't have military tactics that they're staying sharp on.
That's also talk about some of the themes going on. The setting. This takes place in Washington, D.C. Pre-crime only exists in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is the brain of the free world. So if you are a free person and this situation is happening only in your mind, it would only be happening in Washington, D.C.
If you're using Cold War definitions, but yes, go ahead.
His mentor, Max von Sydow, references the Civil War, has a Civil War revolver that he gets as a gift with 5 bullets. That isn't a real story, but it's nice. But why does it have to be the Civil War? Because internally, a war between the states of an internal body. So this is all taking place internally. What else? Okay, so you're telling me this cop, super cop, finds out he's going to murder a man by the name of Leo Crow. Doesn't do anything to figure out who Leo Crow is. Does nothing to figure out who Leo Crow is. All he's concerned about is...
Well, he's also cut off from his databases, right?
It's not clear that the internet exists.
Are we sure that this predictive model is 100% accurate? That's where the guy who's like the advocate for this system being perfect doesn't think, let me try to understand why I would do this. And this person, he only thinks like, oh, let me talk to the person who invented this thing.
And no prior relationship between the two either, right? This was a complete stranger. They had no business knowing each other or any reason to collide other than the prediction.
That's actually explained in the short story, because the short story has this conundrum that can only occur to Anderton because his future is the only one that can be altered by the precogs reports.
By knowing the future.
And so by the nature of receiving the precogs report, he's the only one that could be, whose like future timeline is directed in this one direction, and then depending on the decisions he makes from there.
Because he has the information, right? But you could also say, if the cops show up and instead of arresting you say, hey, we know you were about to murder, don't do that, they would be armed with the same information, basically. Either he's a cop who doesn't want to know anything about motive or anything else, and he's also like missing a child, so he doesn't think that those are connected in any way, and maybe this is connected to the thing that keeps him up at night and is triggering his drug problem. He has no need to know who Leo Crow is. Maybe because subconsciously he already knows who Leo Crow is because he already murdered him and he's in prison going through a rehabilitation process wherein he is a detective and he's in charge of pre-crime, and he stops himself from killing the person and goes through a rehabilitation projection fantasy, which allows him potentially for a path to for freedom.
Redemption.
And Whitwer is the person who collared him. So he hates
Whitwer, let's also talk about Colin Farrell for 1 second. Because he also appears as the leading man in the Total Recall remake. So he's all...
That's interesting. That's right. I didn't think about that.
Colin Farrell is one of the amazing actor, right? But he's fantastic at playing flawed characters and really flawed at playing like leading men heroes, no flawed characters.
Fantastic characters. Yeah.
Like, give his character a drug and alcohol problem and he will deliver for you a spellbinding performance. But if your character does not have a drug and alcohol problem, he will perform that as if he, the actor, has a drug and alcohol problem.
The thing is, I don't think the movie got to it, but he was kind of an Elroyian character. I mean, there was some allusions there to Jack Vincenne's demise in L.A. Confidential. So
interesting.
True.
Yeah. He was, the fun fact about the movie, there is one line that was shot the day after his birthday, and he needed 36 takes to get through the line because he was so hungover.
Well, he does hint at the fact that he's like seen murder and real crime scenes, so maybe he's just seen a lot, like
an orgy of evidence.
Yeah, there's too much evidence. It can't be real.
He's seen things that Anderton couldn't even begin to imagine.
Yeah, he's a bit of a conundrum too, right? Because he's so savvy that he's like, this evidence is too much evidence. And yet he's like, somebody deep with deep knowledge of this system exploited it. Let me tell the person with the deepest knowledge of the system.
Well, Chris, I really found that take really interesting. I think it would have been an interesting take to see if they had carried that out all the way through. Like maybe he wakes up from that. It's a little bit like Jacob's Ladder or something like that, you know?
Right. Yeah, well, I also think that's one thing that has carried over from Philip K. Dick novels into these movies, right? There's thematic elements. There's, visuals of the eye being the window into memory or into soul or into humanity, and also the not knowing what reality is real. And that was something Philip K. Dick really struggled with. He struggled with drugs throughout his life. He, didn't know what was real at times, and probably helped him with his creativity, but also put him into an early grave.
Just need a little clarity.
You want the customary clarity or the new and improved kind of clarity?
Just give me new stuff.
How did these movies fall into the kind of cyberpunk genre?
Like a definition of cyberpunk?
Yeah.
The best definition I've seen of cyberpunk is dystopian future with high tech and low life. So really high technology, but it has decreased the quality of life for people.
Mm-hmm.
Philip K. Dick isn't credited with really being a forefather of cyberpunk directly, so much as a novelist that came after him, William Gibson, notably their author, Neuromancer. Books that kind of were the next generation of writers are more credited as laying the groundwork from a literary standpoint for cyberpunk. But the films that are inspired by Philip K. Dick's novels are credited with laying the groundwork for cyberpunk as well. Blade Runner is one of the, if there's a Bible for cyberpunk, it's that, and it's for what it did visually more so than necessarily the story elements, though. It's all kind of one and the same. It's noir, it's dystopian, and again, high tech, low life.
That's great.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for me, like, these three movies represent the best Philip K. Dick adaptations, and what really translates it so well to the screen is turning it into sort of those noir elements, and having it be along those pulp story lines, peeling back the mystery of some of these things, having some of those characteristics like the femme fatale maybe in Blade Runner. That connection in terms of like how these were all adapted makes this sort of like Philip K. Dick trilogy in particular really interesting. And I think in the cases where there were short stories, Total Recall and Minority Report, again, like, they didn't have the fleshed out main character. The story itself wasn't very satisfying, but through the adaptation process into the movie, moreover, and sort of the plot overall made it interesting, and then also left in each case open for an interesting Chris interpretation, which was really fascinating to hear.
Yeah, and I think the reason Jeremy brought up a good point about these adaptations working so well because of their film noir elements, and I think the reason is that in the stories and in Philip K. Dick's writing, his grappling with reality and our perception of what that is, I think translates well into noir, where there is a grappling with what's the truth, right? And truth...
Right, everything's a conspiracy, everything's a lie.
Right,
yeah.
This kind of seeking of the truth, and this idea that what's before our eyes isn't necessarily the truth or the reality, I think lends itself really nicely, because it's thrown characters in situations where there is a norm, there's kind of these social structure or technological pillars that are kind of holding our society together, and when you start to question that as a result of interactions or these adventures that you go on, I think it translates really nicely. It also gives you what the short stories sometimes lack, which is narrative drive, right? I think the movies, like something like Total Recall, the movie, and Minority Report, the movie, have that narrative drive. In a way, I think Blade Runner is kind of maybe an exception, because maybe it has a little less narrative drive than the actual novel itself, but it starts the tone and atmosphere.
With the narrative drive of like, okay, is he going to hunt and find these things? But that ultimately is not what makes the movie interesting. It's sort of the Roy Batty story, which we don't even know is going to be interesting until the last 20 minutes or so. So I mean, it is kind of like a strange exception to the rule there. But,
right.
But then again, that whole movie, the fact that it even works is an exception to the rule. It doesn't. It's like, how they got everything just sort of almost by accident. It's like this accidental masterpiece. It's crazy. It's like that's not the script they went out with to shoot. Depending on what cut you see, it's like it's a different movie, it's a different experience. The Harrison Ford's understanding of his character versus Ridley's understanding of his character were completely the opposite. All that stuff.
Yeah, the narrative structure, the pacing. Yeah, it's not necessarily what you think would work, but it just does, right? It's, I guess, one of those, great pieces of movie magic, I guess.
Well, and a movie that's way ahead of its time as well, right? It wasn't really appreciated until pretty recently, actually. Probably from that last cut that you watched, Chris, was when the movie finally got seen.
When it first came out, it sort of bombed, but then it actually did start picking up a cult status, almost immediately.
The things that are really great about Blade Runner work in better concert with one another than the things that are working really well on an individual level in Total Recall and Minority Report. There's great camp in Total Recall and Minority Report, but it doesn't necessarily, I'd say for Total Recall it does, but Minority Report's camp doesn't match Tom Cruise's performance, for example. Like nobody told Tom Cruise that there was going to be like wacky, gross out gags. He's acting the shit out of it.
Yeah, right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It is true. Like tonally, like when he's chasing the eyeballs down the road, or when he has that saggy face, or
or what about the car getting built into the car?
Right.
Like that too. That struck me. Like
that was a scene that was cut from North by Northwest that Spielberg admired, I guess. Seriously, it was taken from deleted from. It never made it to film from the script of North by Northwest or some classic film. I believe it was that movie. And Spielberg was like, "Oh, I'm going to take that. That's great. I'm going to put it in my thing."
Yeah, I didn't quite. Watching this time around, you're right. That moment of levity didn't quite match the tone of the thriller that you were kind of engrossed in, right? And
or even the sort of SimCity, bird's eye view scene. It's like that. You would have felt like, oh, that would be more in place in a Total Recall, tonally speaking, than Minority Report. But
yeah, in Total Recall, they're trying to make you care about the plight of the Martians and tugging on your heartstrings there with the little mutant child and everything there. But that doesn't really match it being a Arnold Bullet Fest camp thing. Where Blade Runner, the cinematography, the music, the performances are all in sync and on the same page. And I think you have to look to the director when everything is in line like that.
It's a great call.
Or just got lucky.
Yeah.
Works with great people.
Yeah. Dropped it and it didn't shatter. It's crazy.
Yeah. You were made as well as we could make you, but not to last.
Oh, the thing I was going to think, I wanted to say earlier, writing off something you said, let's say an hour ago, Chris, which is like, he brought up how they had unobtainium in Total Recall. They called it something else. In Avatar, they put a little placeholder name for what they're mining and never bothered to correct that. But in terms of naming something and then not having to sort of explain it, they did such a good job in Minority Report of this drug that then, Tom Cruise is addicted to, that then in Birth Defects created the precogs.
Neuroin?
Which is, the Neuroin, which is like it's like neuro, okay, it's mind, and then you put heroin on the end. So it's like, you just kind of like understand it intuitively, and you don't have to explain it. You don't have to like...
I want to smoke some neurowana.
It's a cool detail because in the book, they're just mutants in the book, right? So it's nice that it gave it a little bit more context to how that came about.
Yeah, and it tied it all sort of together. But just the name itself is worth mentioning because it's so hard to come up with those things. And even if you're a brilliant filmmaker like James Cameron, sometimes you don't bother to go back and autofill all the placeholder names.
Ah, don't worry, none your secret's safe with me. Besides, it's like my daddy used to say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us and putting this together. This was a lot of fun, and thanks for bringing some, outside info too. It's great to, get a few facts in there as well.
As well as some theories.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's a joy to be here. Jeremy, great to see you again.
Absolutely.
And chat with you about 3 fun films. Andy, great to meet you. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Chris, we'd love to have you back for your original block of films. I think Jeremy referred to it as the Dad DVD block. These are all the DVDs that Dad would have on his bookshelf. But
I'm excited to see what those are.
We should come back and do that one in a few weeks or something. So let's do that.
I'm down. All
right, next week we will be talking about movies that inspired Inception. We will be taking a look at Dreams. Sweet. Was that the Hans Zimmer?
Hans.
We'll be taking a look at 3 films. Dreamscape from 1984, one of my all-time faves. Paprika from 2006, which was great. This is our first anime on the show. And Inception from 2010, because we wouldn't be able to look at what inspired Inception without looking at Inception itself. So we're going to be falling down into the dream world, different levels of dreams. That should be exciting.
Yeah, I think this one will be slightly different than some of the other inspiring ones. There's definitely some stuff where it seems like they were directly lifted, but I feel like with these movies now, I haven't seen Dreamscape yet, but I feel like the idea is that there's going to be a little bit more of this inspiring as opposed to just directly ripping off with these ones.
So this will be different than the any Tarantino one that we do.
Yeah, you could say that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms at the Grindhouse Institute. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We will be back next week.
Ciao.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. All those moments will be lost like tears in